big in promoting toxic products. Our facilitator is Robin McKnight, who's the Alaska Sea Grant Fellow of the Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation. We're going to have a series of talks, and then at the end of all of these talks, we're going to welcome all of the speakers back up, and we're going to do this a little bit different this afternoon. Instead of doing tabletop discussions, we're going to have them come up so we can have a panel discussion. That way folks are going to be able to come up to the front of the room and ask the panel questions. They'll all be able to answer, have discussion in front of us, and that'll generate some more conversation. So I'll let Robin go ahead and take it away. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know about you, I've had a lot of coffee. And I also took high school debate like way too seriously, so if I talk fast, that's probably what it is. But yes, my name's Robin McKnight. I'm an Alaska Sea Grant Fellow, working with Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation with Julie Decker, Hannah Wilson. And when I first interviewed for this position with Julie and Hannah, and I think Marcos was also on the call, I did this thing that I think everybody does in interviews, which is where you ask a question, right? That's what you're supposed to do, which they tell me that. I'm 25. I think that's what you're supposed to do. And what I asked was, what is the biggest challenge to the mariculture industry in Alaska? Okay, so I didn't realize how big of a question that was until kind of everyone paused on the call. And Julie, as you know, has a lot of great answers, and she had a really great answer for this. And I think about it all the time, which is that all parts of the industry really need to be moving together and working together. And that has really stuck with me, and I think really applies to this session, which is about product development and the things that kind of sandwich product development, so processing and marketing. And luckily, where there are really big challenges, there are also incredible solutions. So we're going to hear from several amazing panelists today about these challenges and the great solutions to them as they relate to mariculture product development. And as Missy said, we're going to have a panel at the end, so there will be time for some questions at the beginning or the end of these talks, but if you have burning questions, save them for the panel so we can get like a really good discussion going, okay? So our first speaker today is one of the founders of Barnacle Foods, based here in Juneau, so home court advantage. Everybody please welcome Matt Kern.
All right, let's see. Yeah, my name's Matt Kern. I'm one of the founders of Barnacle Foods. It's really great to be here today. Thanks for inviting us to share. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I would be ever in a position to run a business, I probably wouldn't have thought that was very likely. My background is in ecology, and my first career was as a habitat biologist with the Department of Fish and Game. But while I was at work, busy on that front, I also had a lot of ideas, sometimes scribbling down notes about starting Kelp Salsa Factory. And here we are today on that path forward. So yeah, really excited to be here today. Talk a little bit about how we got started at Barnacle Foods, and then dive into the product development side of things. Talk about how our products can serve as gateway products for Alaska kelp, how we are connecting those products to market, kind of the insights that we're gathering by having products out in the market and seeing how that's affecting our product innovation and new products that we're developing. And then just real briefly, we'll go over a few of the challenges that we're seeing at Barnacle Foods and that are really relevant to all of us in the room today. So yeah, excited to be here to talk about developing and promoting promising Alaska kelp products, which is something we've now been at for quite a while at Barnacle. So just a little walk down memory lane here, throwback to our first ever edition of Kelp Salsa back in 2016 when we called ourselves the Wild Alaska Kelp Company. And ever since then, we've just continued to learn and adapt and change our products based on the feedback we're getting from the market. So here's V2, here's V3. You can see sometimes we called it kelp salsa, then we went back and maybe salsa is something better to call it. So we're just constantly adapting and evolving based on the feedback we're getting from the market. And luckily, you can make kelp into a lot of different things. So we've had a lot of variety in our product development, and I think that just speaks to the great promise of many future kelp products that are going to come out of this industry as we move ahead. So how did we get Barnacle started? Like many of you in the room here, we wanted to do something that we thought could do good things for our oceans, communities, and future. And we thought that this kelp industry was one way to go about that. We all grew up in Juneau and wanted to do something that contributed to food security and regional resiliency. And we thought a homegrown, scalable business would be a great tool to work towards that effort. And from the get-go, my first thoughts around starting a business were more on the production side, generating more food in Southeast Alaska. So we started walking down that path and exploring what that would look like. And one thing became clear, it would be really nice if there was a local market that we could sell a high volume of whatever we're growing to at the end of the season. But pretty quickly we realized that that didn't exist at the time, and so we wanted to put our effort into that part of the equation to develop the market, develop products, and see to hopefully become that market for many future farmers and producers in the region. So we went about it and built our kelp salsa factory and got to work right here in Juneau with that goal of adding value and keeping the value chain planted here in Alaska. So now jumping over to the product development side and the marketing side, we have a few parameters that guide us in how we design our products and market them. One, we want them to be as approachable as possible to as wide of an audience as possible. So we've taken the approach of not necessarily finding people who are already interested in seaweed, but find people who like everyday foods that like hot sauce and salsas, and we can infuse kelp into that product and introduce them to eating kelp in their lives. And our hope is that we might be the first encounter someone has with kelp in their diets, and that they have a good experience and then want to try more kelp products down the road. So we've heard some people refer to our products as kelp gateway foods. And other things that we're thinking about when we're coming up with products, the first thing is it has to have a lot of kelp in it. So this isn't just a small additive so that we can say it has kelp in it. Our products are made mostly of seaweed, so our hot sauce is about 40% kelp. And most of our other products similarly are made from a high proportion of seaweed because we need volume to grow this industry. Additionally, we've made our products shelf stable. That's a way that we can efficiently get them to market in a cost-effective way, and it just works for the model that we've created. And then quality is of the utmost importance for us as well. We are often the first encounter with kelp for a lot of our customers, and so we want to make sure that they have a good experience and want to keep coming back for our products, but also for new kelp products as well. And then another approach that has worked well for us and we think is a good strategy for the Alaska kelp industry is to co-brand or co-manufacture products across different brands or manufacturers. And this is a great way to merge your audience and connect with new people that may not otherwise be familiar with your company or your products. So then once we create that product, the next step in the process is delivering that product to market. At Barnacle, we have two main channels that we're getting our products to market through. One is direct to consumer, which we do through our website and to some degree on Amazon. And then we sell business to business through wholesale and distribution partners across the country. And for us, having multiple channels is a great way to be resilient and be able to weather changes in the world at large, like a pandemic. And it's also really great that these channels can work together. So an example of that is through our website, we're able to connect to audiences spread out across the entire country and beyond. And that allows us to acquire customers in a very spread out manner. But then when we're able to connect with a retail partner who's willing to put our products on the shelf, it makes it so there's a better chance that we might have some built-in audience and customer base that are already coming into their shop, might recognize our product and already be a customer. And that really helps as we're launching our products. There's a window where you need to succeed on the shelf, otherwise you lose your slot. And then similarly, we're also lucky that stores are great salespeople as well, and they might introduce new customers to our products who then want to discover what else Barnacle makes and go over to our website and try some other products. So for us, these channels are really important. They work together. Other channels include food service or working with restaurants, which is also a really effective way to introduce new people to kelp and other products. And then ingredient sales is another way that we can introduce more folks to Alaska kelp. But then you can see getting on the shelf is just the stage 2 in the process. The next and equally important part is getting your product off the shelf and into the hands of consumers. And so in a typical hot sauce section at a grocery store, this is what you might be looking at. Can anyone find the bullwhip sauce? So it kind of hides there, and we're up against a pretty competitive landscape, as you can imagine, trying to get your product to be sold. So it takes quite a challenge and a strategic approach to make sales once you get on the shelf. So a lot has changed since we started our company 7 years ago, but there's been one thing that remains steady year after year, and that is kelp is the ingredient of the year. Food trend coming your way. 2023 is no different. Just take a quick Google search and you see New York Times announces briny as the flavor of the year. Pinterest says Gen Zers are going to be looking for seaweed. Whole Foods mentions kelp as one of their top 10 food trends for 2023. And this is nothing new. This has been the case every year since we started back in 2016. And what we can tell you from being on the shelf and getting this market input regularly is that kelp is a wonderful differentiating ingredient, and it is really wonderful for grabbing the attention, especially from the press, but also from buyers and people that run stores. Everyone agrees that this concept makes a lot of sense and that there will be demand in consumers who want to buy products that have kelp in them for the reasons that we all know. But from having our products out there, we can tell you that there's not a tidal wave of customers knocking down the doors looking for kelp products. In fact, there can be somewhat of a deterrent if you're just talking your general person off the street in the United States. They aren't going to necessarily choose a kelp product over a non-kelp product, which makes our job a little more challenging. We kind of have an uphill battle to persuade people to give this product a try and include that in their diets. So that's where a really important aspect of our communications comes in, and that's work that we all have to do as people in the Alaska mariculture industry, and that is to have strong efforts around outreach and education. So we've been really lucky to be on the forefront of this industry and be able to share the story of Alaskan kelp with a wider audience. And it's a very engaging and compelling story that people are attracted to. And there's some efforts that we can collaborate on that'll make our job a lot easier in the years ahead. One of that is understanding our nutritional aspects of kelp so we know what we're selling into the market and can better highlight some of those differentiators. And then the carbon sequestration storyline that we're all really excited about is another thing that's going to require a lot more research so that we can dig in and be able to share that story as accurately as possible. But yeah, Alaska kelp is super compelling. We have this beautiful backdrop of working in Alaska that makes things very easy to display in a picturesque way. But with all that said, to really convert people into customers, for us, the most effective strategy is through taste. So you can tell people about the concept of kelp and get them excited about all the benefits, but until you taste it and see that it's something that you enjoy, that's really where you're going to see great repeat customers. So then just a little bit on some of the challenges we are facing at Barnacle Foods and that are really relevant across the whole industry here. For us, one of our biggest challenges is supply of bull kelp. We've had some great partnerships with farms and see a lot of people who have attempted cultivation. At this point, it seems to be a little more challenging than some of the other species like sugar kelp.
but we're really excited about all the enthusiasm and continued efforts around farming bull kelp. Tomorrow's bull kelp panel is going to be really exciting to dig into. But we think bull kelp provides a really great differentiated product for the Alaska market that won't be able to be cultivated elsewhere in the country or in the globe. So we see a lot of strong incentive to keep pushing for this. And additionally, a lot of our products use fresh formed bull kelp, which doesn't require drying, which creates an optimal value for the producer and for the processor. But that brings up the next challenge, as we've already highlighted today a little bit, but kelp drying is a challenge for a number of reasons. Just some basic arithmetic around kelp drying that makes it challenging. For every 20 pounds of wet kelp, we yield 1 pound of dried kelp through our process. And that's pretty similar across many people in the industry. So you can take your wet weight and immediately multiply that price by 20, and you have your price for dry weight, and that's before you've factored in labor or energy use and other costs. So it's a challenge, but unfortunately it's a necessary challenge because a lot of the seaweed world works on dried seaweed, including our products as well contain a lot of dried seaweed. So it's something that we're going to have to focus on in the years ahead and figure out collaboratively. Transportation and logistics is another big factor and challenge for us, given the remote nature and spread out nature of all the resources in Southeast Alaska. So we're excited that we can hopefully provide as local of a market as possible to reduce that transportation cost. But for every leg in the journey of the seaweed, the producer might be losing some value on their crop. But we were excited to also work collaboratively with all the farmers out there to try to figure out logistics and transportation solutions that work. And we've been really fortunate to partner with a lot of seafood industry folks to navigate some of those challenges on a case-by-case basis. And hopefully, as more of us are working in this space, there's going to be kind of a critical mass that helps us overcome some of that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your attention. We're excited to be part of this community and realize that it's going to take a lot of collaboration and cooperation to make this happen in the years ahead. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. And Barnacle, their kelp chili crisp, actually won the Seattle People's Choice Award at the Alaska Symphony of Seafood in November, which was really exciting. And we had a lot of entrants to that competition that featured some really great Alaskan kelp products. So it was really exciting. And we're having the Juneau Symphony next week. So if you want more info on that, just talk to Hannah or me or Julie Decker, and we'll be happy to chat with you about that. Next up, we have Nate Schlachter, who's coming from Blue Evolution to talk to us about processing. So welcome, Nate.
Thank you so much. And the clicker's right up there.
Is it obvious which button advances it? Thanks. All right, good afternoon. My name is Nate Schlachter. I'm Vice President of Operations with Blue Evolution. I'm going to speak twice in this section. So we're going to bookend. We're going to start talking about what a buyer, processor, seller looks like, how we evaluate the kelp, how we process the kelp, and then on the back end here in about an hour, I'll talk a little bit about our sales efforts and the channels that we're focused on as a company. So we got our start in Kodiak. Predates me, but somewhere around 2016, 2017, Nick Mangini, who spoke earlier, pulled the first or second permit in the state. And in 2017, Alf Pryor farmed on that lease, and we had the first commercial harvest and processing season in the state and for Blue Evolution. To date, we've harvested just about 1 million pounds. We'll cross that in 2023 with this upcoming season. And we chose Kodiak intentionally. Nick made a very compelling case for why the company ought to be looking to Kodiak as a place to set up processing hub. We found clean wind energy, which is appealing to us and our brand. We found existing infrastructure, canneries that were willing to take us in those early days and then allow us to kind of mature and grow into other partnerships, which I'll talk about in a second. And then fairly easy access to freight via Matson, going from Kodiak down to Seattle. So we do ship all of our finished product to the lower 48 to access the markets that we sell to. So currently we're working with Kachemak tribe locally in Kodiak. They own a processing facility called Wild Source, primarily a sport fish processor that does some commercial processing. This will be our 4th year that we've been in their facility. I feel like for anybody who's looking at Alaska and trying to crack the nut on processing, it's a lot of conversations around, well, let's use the existing infrastructure. And what's challenging as a processor is the activities that we want to achieve tend to fall into a season in which the fish processing season is occurring. And so we think we found a partnership that we can continue to grow into, in that basically from April to June is a shoulder season for Wild Source. And what's very unique is that they assign all of their staff over to us, and we manage our 6-week processing season. And it's been amazing. We get a workforce that now 4 years in knows what they're doing. Their attention to detail, the efficiency, and their ability to problem solve and think through how we can become more efficient or solve certain problems. So in Kodiak, we purchase kelp from 4 different independent farms: Nick Mangini, Alf Pryor and Alexa Meyer, Adelia was speaking earlier, Adelia and Taloff over in Uganic, and then the Bateman family. So we have there's 2 farms that are close into town, and then 2, as Adelia was mentioning, that are 8 hours plus away from the processing facility. We purchase on a grade A spec. For us, that's a human grade consumption spec that we've developed over the last 2 to 3 years that talks about allowable bycatch or biofouling to the kelp when it comes into the processing facility. We talk with our farmers about how we want the kelp cut when it comes to us, no holdfast, no line, things like that, really trying to set that standard for what grade A means. But it also means that we need to work really hard at developing grade B markets, because not every piece of kelp coming out of the water is a pristine piece of kelp that's going to go into the food market. And so that's put a challenge on us as a processor to continue to work to find those other markets so that we can accept a wider spec. So just to give you a quick idea of where we are currently on your left and where we're headed, I'll also call out that we operate a seaweed farm location in Baja, Mexico. So you'll see on the left side, it references sea lettuce, which is the species ulva that we grow in Baja. And then in Kodiak, we're growing ribbon kelp and sugar kelp, which in the culinary world, we've branded as Alaskan kombu and Alaskan wakame. To date, we're processing to a frozen form only for the 2 kelps in Alaska. And so the left side represents the food market, which is encompassing of food service, restaurant sales, and also food manufacturing. But as we go down to further to the right, it's thinking about where are the other markets that we can access that either will require a lower price point to the farmers, which now we need to find economies of scale to get into those markets, or just a lot of R&D time and investment to get there. So for today, these are the 3 products that we're producing, all frozen. 1 pound whole leaf, both ribbon kelp and sugar kelp. That's a pack size that's ideal for restaurants. We have a 15-pound whole leaf, which admittedly we'll say is not the right pack size. It's too big for a restaurant, and we've learned in the last 2 to 3 years that this is not the form that food manufacturers want. They do not want a frozen whole leaf piece of kelp. And then puree. So this is a bridge for us. So we're grinding kelp, we're packing it in 5-gallon pails, 35 pounds, and we're blast freezing it. This is a wet ingredient designed for food manufacturers, but just as Matt said, we know the path is dry, is where we need to be. And this has been validated over the last couple of years, that this has application in home, but not necessarily to the scale that we had hoped, and we know that dry is where we need to be. So our investment in processing has really been focused on quality, and that's to the benefit, obviously, of our brand, but for the state at large, is that we really want to drive that Alaskan-grown kelp is the highest quality kelp in North America, and to leverage that as a way to open markets. Investments to that degree look like commercial processing equipment that comes from other industries. It's a full-time quality assurance manager on staff that really holds the quality mantle for the company and puts those systems in place so that operators in the processing are held accountable for the practices that we have to make sure that we're putting out, highest quality and clean kelp into the world. So food safety is key. It's a typo there, but we follow GMP, Good Manufacturing Practices, the Food Safety and Modernization Act. We make sure that we fall under that. We have HACCP plans. We're really putting the rigor in place so that we can match the market, which is really the food ingredient market in terms of the form. And then we continue to pursue certifications. This last year, we achieved organic certification on our products. So quickly, I'll just take you through what does this physically look like to do the pass off from farmer to buyer, processor, seller. And for us, that starts with the tender. So we contract a tender every season to pick up the kelp from the farm grounds, as Adelia was talking about. For us, this is really important that we have independent farms, independent tender. Everybody owns their own business. That gives, we believe, everybody the greatest economic opportunity within this industry. So we don't own our own tender. Bags, no-mar bags are what we prefer. All of our farmers use. Each farm has maybe a different style of harvesting, but by and large, when the tender arrives, we can just pick bags. We load them into insulated totes with a little bit of water, and then we're trucking to town. The too close into town farms, it's under 30 minutes by the time the kelp is hitting the dock. And that gives us the ability to process kelp as little as 6 hours to 18 hours from the point at which it's harvested, which is really the ability to achieve that high quality spec. So as we come into the line, we do a freshwater wash. That's again just to remove some bycatch or even some biofouling potentially. It allows us we do an inspection to remove holdfast or any line that may have made its way through the harvesting process, and then we do a steam blanch. And so that's what you're seeing there on the left is the brown kelp then turns green. It's stopping some of that enzymatic activity that's going to lead to spoilage and hopefully locking in the quality given that it's been processed so soon out of the water. Just a visual representation of the pack forms and what they look like. So we use roll stock on the 1 pound. These are 15 pound, it's a vac bag, and then a 5-gallon pail. So once it comes through the blancher, we drop the temperature. We're then going through the pack out line and then onto freezer racks into a mobile blast freezer. Kelp sits in the mobile blast freezer overnight. We start each day by doing a case up, we palletize, and then we load into a Matson van. When full, it's loaded on the barge and is headed to Oregon. Looking ahead, where we're headed, things that are on our minds in terms of processing, we're always thinking about continuous improvement. I think one of the challenges we have as a processor is we get 6 weeks every year to revisit our process and to really get our hands dirty and make tweaks rather than being a 365 operation where you can make those changes daily. It's a big lift to be able to activate new things every year, but certainly that's the goal as we grow up and evolve as a company. The dehydration line in Kodiak, we're going to activate in 2023. As I mentioned, we know that that's where we need to be for the market. In Baja, we operate a 365 farm and processing that dries the sea lettuce, so we have the technology, we know how to do it, but as Matt was saying, there's a whole host of hurdles to activate drying in Alaska, both from cost and existing infrastructure and on and on and on. But we've made the commitment as a team this year. We're going to pilot it. We're going to put up as much dry material as we can so that we can move into those markets. Species expansion, we'd love to be able to process bull kelp and look at others. Again, if it's market driven, we'll do it. And then R&D. I think we constantly ask ourselves, are we processing to the form that's right for the market? And that's the uniqueness, I think, that a business like ours has, is that we're processing, but we're also out there prospecting and meeting with potential buyers and pitching, will this work? Could this work? Receiving the feedback, and then coming all the way back to the processing stage to retool potentially for the next year. And I'll stop there and pick up the sales piece in a little bit.
All right, thank you so much. And next, we're headed to South Central. Coming to us from Kachemak Bay, we have Evie Witten. She's coming to talk to us about the Kachemak Kelp Hub and Regeneration North. So welcome, Evie.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, great. Wrong button? There we go. Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. As Robin said, I'm Evie Witten, and I am with a firm called Regeneration North. And and I'm part of a project that we're calling the Kachemak Kelp Hub, and it is a project between Saltwater Inc. and Regeneration North, and for the 2023 and 2024 seasons, we have some funding from NOAA Fisheries through the Salt and Stall Kennedy grant. And just a little bit about us. Saltwater Inc. is a longtime Alaska company that focuses on fisheries and marine mammal observing, electronic monitoring, and ocean health. And Regeneration North we are a small group of ecologists focused primarily on implementing natural climate solutions and regenerative agriculture. And I also wear another hat. I'm also a first-year kelp farmer in Kachemak Bay. And I got pulled into this project mostly because my initial interest in kelp farming. And in talking with folks at Saltwater, they pulled me in and said, hey, we've got some problems that if we want to support a viable kelp industry in Alaska, we've got to get around these bottlenecks of primary processing and connecting to markets. And why don't you come and help us with this problem? And so from these discussions, and I've circled primary processing there because that's what we're really tackling the most at the moment, so I'm going to focus on that today. So we came up with this idea of developing this hub, and our goals are primarily to dry kelp for all the reasons that we've discussed today, getting rid of the water, and because we had an initial hypothesis and information that there was markets for the dried kelp that weren't being fully met. But we wanted to do it in a way that was both energy and labor efficient, and as has also been said quite a few times today, we wanted to use existing infrastructure in coastal community as much as possible. So last year in 2022, we started with a very small pilot project, and we decided that we were going to go as low tech as possible. And so we built a high tunnel. And our hypothesis was that we could rely on solar energy mostly to dry kelp for high-grade kelp for food markets. So we built this high tunnel. It's a pretty straightforward, it's a Stimson shed design. It was 16 by 20. It's got a single wall, and it's really set up like it would be for growing. At least last year we had it set up like you would set it up to grow vegetables. 2 intake vents, had a 20-inch fan at the other end. We had landscape fabric, and then a couple layers of landscape fabric, and then tarp on the floor. And then we set it up with a temperature humidity sensor and a electric monitor so that we know how much electric we were using. We set this up at Ice Dock Road out on the Homer Spit in the fish processing plant that some of you may know as the former auction block that's now owned by Salmon Sisters. And this was a great place to work, in part because it's adjacent to the city dock and they have a saltwater well. And overall was just a really great supportive partnership. And then we bought some kelp. And last year we bought kelp from Spinnaker Sea Farms, from Lindsay and Leah, and which was also a really great collaboration. And we bought about 500 pounds of combined sugar and sugar kelp and alaria. And brought it into town. We're able to use the crane, at least some of the time, I'm looking at Lindsay, to bring the kelp up to the plant. And then we stored it in temporarily in, filled the totes back up with seawater and went through a sorting process and did some of the kelp in a freshwater rinse and some in a saltwater rinse. And we did the freshwater rinse was because we knew we had a buyer who was interested in some of the freshwater rinsed kelp. We also froze some of both species in a blast freezer just to see what the effect would be when we thawed it and dried it, to see if we had any difference in quality or consistency. And then we hung a whole bunch of kelp. Different things that we tried and tested. We set up both single lines and double lines in the high tunnel. You can see both layers up there in the corner. We tested different materials to hang from. We used net twine, but also tested some lightweight aluminum hat channel that we suspended between the purlins in the high tunnel. We tried a little bit of tray drying. And then we also set up the high tunnel with a standard dehumidifier and a supplemental electric heater. And I'll come back to this a little bit more in our results, but you can see in this picture, we had beautiful sunny weather in May in Homer last year, and we actually never end up using the heater. We measured the moisture content in the dry kelp with a standard wood moisture meter that we had worked with Chris Zanito at Sea Grant to help us correlate it to water activity. So this was a really nice low-cost way to make sure that we had good quality control. We had some kelp that was biofouled, and I should really explain that some of this actually came from we received some kelp from the Native Conservancy in Prince William Sound from their research sites that they weren't able to sell. And so we experimented with some of it, and some of it we ended up giving to local farmers, in part to kind of feel out the market for the B-grade kelp. It was quite popular. So our results. We found that, well, I'll go through the data first. We had 5 to 10% yield after water loss. We were able to put about 150 average pounds in per high tunnel load. The average time to dry was 28 hours, but you can see there's a high variation, 20 to 40 hours, and that really had to do with what time of day we hung it. To some degree, it had to do with whether it got cloudy or not that day, but it had to do more with night and day temperatures. And cooling at night, condensing, and giving us wet kelp in the morning. Our average low temperature in the high tunnel was 35, and our average high was 98 degrees. We got up to 110 degrees plus. And as you can see, the outdoor temperatures, not too different from what we had inside the tunnel at night, but temperatures were generally from the mid-30s to the high 50s during the day outside. So we were getting nice and toasty in the high tunnel. We had very low energy use, in part because we really didn't plug much of anything in except for a fan and occasionally testing the dehumidifier. And this is an important one, the labor. It took 15 to 28 person hours for each batch. And there's high variation there in part because we had a crew on a steep learning curve and because we were stopping to record and take notes. I think we can improve on this efficiency, but that was a big deal. It was labor intensive. Some of the other things we found, freezing the kelp did not have a big impact on the quality. We were able to thaw it and dry it, and really could not tell the difference in the end product. This is a picture of the lightweight aluminum hat channel, which was nice for hanging the kelp, but the kelp stuck to it at the end and was a real pain to clean it. And so that was something we decided we wouldn't try again. And then we also found that the salt, or rather the freshwater rinse of the kelp gave us some blistering, which is to be expected, which I'm not sure really mattered if you flake the product, but it wasn't really what we wanted to see. So our conclusions from our very small pilot were that drying kelp in a high tunnel works, but it's quite labor intensive. We really needed to set up the high tunnel with better airflow and ventilation, which of course makes sense, that we weren't trying to grow something in the high tunnel, we were trying to dry something. And so a lot of room for improvement there. And that, while we were really lucky, we didn't have to use our backup heat source, that in future years we might, if we really want to process in greater volume, we're gonna need a better backup heat source. So moving on for this year, we are going to set up with 2 high tunnels so that we can do side-by-side tests under the same conditions. And we're doing a lot of sketching and doing a lot of math around airflow and ventilation. And we're looking at both some very simple and some less simple designs that we may try to figure out side-by-side tests. But in general, we want to keep this, we want to keep the whole process as simple as possible so that it could hopefully be replicable in other coastal communities. And we're working on designs for a backup heat source for days when we don't have sun. And one of the things we're doing is looking at capturing waste heat from a freezer unit, as well as some other ways to heat rather efficiently. And then there's the big one of figuring out how to improve labor efficiency, and then also looking at testing other methods of drying and or stabilizing the kelp. And I think looking at these other methods, I think is important. That one of the things that was a learning from our little pilot is that, first of all, you really can't get around the physics of it. That you've got moisture that you've got to drive off, and that's going to take a certain amount of energy. And it's great to capture the solar energy in the high tunnel, but we need another way to address that. And that there's an equation between energy in and labor efficiency, that we can add more physical heat and use less labor, but then that cuts down on our efficiency in terms of energy use. So we're trying to balance all of those things. The other piece, markets, in what we've learned from our pilot was that we probably need to get organic certified for outside markets, especially if we want to sell it all into nutraceutical space. That drying kelp is, I think we have learned that there is definitely market demand out there for the dried kelp product. that's all I have. But I think we're saving questions until the end. Is that right? Oh, yeah. Okay, I've got time for if anybody has questions. Okay.
So I was emailing you. Can you talk about the labor involved? Like, what is the actual labor? And if you've looked at mechanical extraction of the water?
Yeah, so the actual labor is the physical getting up and hanging the stuff, and then after it dries, of taking it down. And to some degree, you know, washing and sorting, but we did a lot of sorting as we hung. We have looked at mechanical ways of extracting some of the water, and we've talked to a lot of people about it, and have been told that if you want to then take the individual fronds and hang them, be careful not to compress them, because then they just get mushed together. And we did find that a little bit, just trying to like press some water out and spin some water out last year, that you can damage the fronds. So. But I think those are areas that need to be looked at more, for sure. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. And next we have Hannah Lindoff from the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute. Welcome, Hannah. There you go. And then the clicker, right? They'll set it up, and then you can start clicking.
All right, well, thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm Hannah Lindoff. I'm the Senior Director of Global Marketing and Strategy for the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute. And I am also wife of Anthony Lindoff, who is an Alaskan oyster farmer. He has Kawu Shellfish Farm outside of Hoonah. So I put together this presentation, and I called it ASME the next 40 years. Not because I actually have any idea what the next 40 years have in store for ASME, but to demonstrate how open we are to change, and how much we are looking forward to the next 40 years. We just completed our 40th anniversary. So a little bit about the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, or ASME. We are your friendly neighborhood marketing institute. We are just a few blocks away, downtown Juneau. We are 20 Alaskans, state employees, and our job is to raise the economic value of Alaska seafood. So we have a variety of programs, but that is our fundamental core mission, is to raise that economic value. And we have the wonderful job that there are a lot of different ways to do that. So we work and we evolve constantly on how we can raise that value. So just to give you a little bit about our scope, obviously the Alaska seafood industry is huge. We, here in Alaska, we produce 60% of the U.S.'s wild capture fisheries. And so we have marketing programs in 40 countries. We also have a very strong marketing presence here in the United States. That's our #1 market. And we are also a highly recognized brand throughout the world, but also particularly in the US. That's where you see the statistic, the #1 brand for proteins among US menus. Now, I think like Oreo cookie might beat us for like overall, but that's really not a fair comparison. And for proteins, we're doing very well. So this is kind of reiterating that fact. So one thing that ASME does, one thing that we invest a lot in, is research. Consumer research is very expensive, but we can conduct consumer research for the entirety of the industry, and then we can come out with these fact sheets that explain just how important it is to purchase Alaska seafood, what, the kind of consumer perception, the positive perception there is surrounding the Alaska brand name and our different products. And that helps our producers go to market, and it helps us promote those products at market. So these are just some of the statistics we have from the most recent market research here in the United States that explains exactly how much somebody might pay more for a product if they know it's from Alaska, which is, a really important selling point. All of this is also available on our website, alaskaseafood.org. So just to talk about the different programs that we have, like I said, just a few blocks away, we have the technical program, and this one is really like the core foundation of ASME, where we set some standards and we say, this, you were talking about like grade A and grade B kelp. Well, we have set those standards. We've said this is a number 1, this is the skin color guide for this salmon, or here are the buyer's guides. This is the fundamental core, what you can expect if you are going to buy these products. And anyone can take these around the world, and I can take them even though I do not, fish or sell seafood, and be able to provide a buyer with fundamental information about the products available from Alaska. So currently we have a shellfish buyer's guide, salmon buyer's guide, and a whitefish buyer's guide. And that is all coming out of the technical program. They also work on nutrition and just other scientific inquiries. Also on issues that we don't need to bring up, but sometimes there are problems in the industry, and they also work on that. Our communications program is a really great program. So not only do they do in-state communication, so that's like kind of some of the outreach that you guys have been talking about, community outreach, but also run a really fabulous US program with influencers, with chefs, and they bring missions into Alaska to familiarize different press and chefs with the products that we have. So we do that generally in the summer and occasionally in the winter to Dutch Harbor. The U.S. retail and food service programs promote Alaska seafood either at the retail level or in food service, with the diversification being fine dining or more like a operator level or quick service level. And then we have the international programs. These are the programs that I oversee, and we do all of that stuff. Well, not the technical stuff, but all of that other stuff. Plus, we also work quite a bit on policy, market diversification, and exploration. Okay, if you take away one thing from this presentation, I want you to know that on our website, we have an Alaska Seafood digital library full of very high-res photography, trendy photography, and video assets that are available for all Alaska producers to use. Photography is something that has evolved quite a bit. We redo our food photography almost every year to keep up with the latest trends. Video also, we're constantly sort of re-upping what we have so that it looks modern, it looks sharp. We have drone footage, we have what's trendy. So this is available now, and this is one of the biggest assets that I think that we offer smaller producers, is that we have art files, photography, and video files available for their use. Okay, now we're totally making a giant leap here. But this is another thing that we do, and this is something that I'm sharing because it's something that I could imagine if ASME was working with mariculture products, this would be something that we would do. This is, well, not in Romania though. This was a food blogger mail out that we did in Romania. And the reason that I'm sharing this one and not one from a different region is that I actually think they just did an amazing job, and it's very cute. They put all the products in this cooler here, and then if you don't read Romanian, let me read it to you. It says, watch out, there's something wild inside. That is a big part of our messaging when we're talking about finfish. And then we put in a bunch of different products and then sent it to different food bloggers throughout Romania so that we could have this big online buzz. Now this is something, our Romania program is not very big. This was like the flagship thing that we did. But this is the kind of activity that we do all around the world all the time, and it's a really great way to get your products out there. But if you don't follow Romanian food bloggers, you might know this lady. This is from Martha's new show, and this is something that we were working on last week. Our comps program was. We had an Alaska fisherwoman with Martha working on several different recipes and debuting a bunch of different ideas that Martha has for Alaska seafood. She's a great ambassador, and we work with her through our PR agency. So the communications program does have a contract with, obviously, a world-class PR agency that gets us these really good ins, and this is not something that we pay for. We contract with the PR agency, but it's not like Martha gets a kickback here. We're just providing her the content. I also just wanted to share some media hits. With our PR agency, we have just a really wide reach where we can get information out about our products and get these free placements in well-known publications. And so this is just a really tiny glimpse in the vast number of media hits that we're getting throughout the year. And just so you don't think we're a bunch of oldies, we also have TikTok outreach and Instagram campaigns and all that good stuff. So we try to run the gamut, make sure we are beginning to capture the Gen Z audience now as they will become our future consumers. As they earn more and more money, they're more attractive to us. So we're out there building that market now. So in terms of, something this kind of goes back to what Matt was talking about, standing out at retail. That's, every product has that issue, and while we see more and more online purchasing, the brick and mortar retail sales, especially for seafood, it's really important. And so this is just an example of one promotion that we did this summer that I thought turned out very nice. It's very aesthetically pleasing. That was in the Whole Foods flagship store in London. And we did a salmon promotion, but we dressed up the window outside so it kind of almost looks like, a fishing net. It came off really well, and we had a lot of information right at the chiller case to call out our product. And then we also had on the outside windows a QR code, and here's one of just many, many, many British gentlemen who stopped by to scan that code, get more information about ASME, and come to our website, and then hopefully become a repeat consumer. But taking it down to something more simple, we just have this is the type of material that's available for anyone to order. And these are just, we call them POS, or point of sale materials that you can order from our website and put wherever you're selling your products. Or you can go a little bigger than that. We also have a program in South America, and our Brazil program is really fun. And so they have the bear that comes into the store and helps out with the promotions. And this is an influencer doing a bit from the store that has the promotion happening. And then these are some giveaway items that they created, including the bear paw mitts, which are my favorite. And another thing that we can do, and this is also something that Matt was talking about, is we can work with other commodities. We have so many partnerships all around the world with other seafood entities, and we have partnerships with things that cross-sell well with Alaska seafood, such as wine. So that's another idea, and that's something that ASME, as an agency, can do, and we have the bandwidth to make those partners. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about is market access. This is really my bailiwick. I work in the international program, and we have had a lot of issues with tariffs, with needing to develop new markets, with non-tariff trade barriers, and with just exploration. So we're always looking for new markets. We need to really take the cream off the top of many, many markets, and because we are an expensive product in general. And so we do a lot of trade missions. We bring buyers here to Alaska to see what our products are, and we also go outbound. So we have a trade mission leaving to Vietnam at the end of next week. We'll have 14 trade members on that mission, and then it's pretty heavily subsidized with some grant funding that we have in the international program to bring people to that region and make new connections. So that was a very brief overview of what we do, but most importantly, I want to say I really enjoyed listening to all these different stories and learning more about this industry, and that's what we do at ASME, is we tell stories. So I've got a lot of good ones now, and it's really been a pleasure to be here, and hopefully there will be an opportunity for ASME to work with mariculture products from Alaska. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Hannah. Next up, we have Liz MacDonald, who's coming to us from Maine to talk a little bit about Atlantic Sea Farms. So, welcome, Liz.
Hi. And the clicker is right there. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Liz MacDonald. I'm the Seaweed Supply Director at Atlantic Sea Farms, and this is my first visit to Alaska. I must say I am in awe of the cultural and natural beauty here. It is amazing, and I've only been here for a few days, so excited to explore more. And before I start, there are two people in the audience that I have to recognize. And first is my colleague, Dr. Thusiskevitz. He is my counterpart who runs our cultivation center. And then next is James Crimp, who, without his work prior to Thu and I arriving at Atlantic Sea Farms, would not have been possible. So he essentially started doing both of our jobs, and we decided that's crazy for one person to do. It needs to be done by two people. So they are also here in the crowd. Yeah, round of applause for James, yes. Thank you. So one of the things that was touched on earlier today is that the Gulf of Maine, the water temperature there is rising at an alarming rate. It is rising faster than 97% of all the waters in the rest of the world, which is very significant. And another thing that we have facing is that we are primarily focused on one main fishery. Everybody in Maine fishes for lobster, and we saw this in an earlier presentation. And this is extremely volatile, especially with our warming waters. And so whenever Atlantic Sea Farms talks, we're always talking about lobster because that's what we have in Maine. And so lobster and seaweed are intrinsically linked in our state. And this is personally really important as well, being from a fishing family. My husband Trevor is here. You can't miss him with the big red beard, and he is a commercial lobsterman in Maine. So in my personal and in my professional work, it is extremely important to have a diversity adaptation strategy in the face of climate change. And that is why Atlantic Sea Farms exists. So we are in Maine, we are also facing regulatory changes in our lobster fishery. And so with those two combined factors, there needs to be something for people to focus on with, as Dana mentioned, roughly 10,000 commercial fishermen in our state, and that being one of the most economically viable resources in our state. So ASF has created a first-of-its-kind supply network that caters to fishermen's unparalleled skills on the water. And this is working directly with 30 partner fishermen on roughly less than 100 acres, so right about 90 acres for all of those 30 farmers combined. And you can see these dots on the map represent the spaces that we occupy in the harbors. This is 9 harbors, and in 2022, these 30 partner farmers harvested roughly 975,000 pounds of kelp. In 2021 alone, these 30 farmers were 80% of all the line-grown kelp in the U.S., which is a very large number, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is our main pillar, our coastal communities, and bringing viability to people that live and work on our coastal shores. Ocean health is another area that we are extremely focused on actively improving, and by growing seaweed, we're seeing that we are locally mitigating some of the effects of ocean acidification. And these are things that are extremely important to our lobster industry and our shellfish industries as well. In addition to those 2 pillars, food systems are increasingly important. So like we heard in our opening talk this morning, having access to food is something that we are increasingly more aware of in this time of the world. So being able to grow food domestically that is healthy for our oceans, our environment, and our people is extremely important. And although 85% of the line-grown kelp in the U.S. Was by fishermen in Maine in 2021, that combined with what was grown in Alaska and in Europe is roughly 1% of what was grown on the planet. So we are a drop in a bucket, and that's important to remember. And of that 98% of seaweed that's being grown elsewhere, mostly in Asia, that is having a lack of traceability, and having a domestic product is something that combined on our west and our east coast is very, very valuable and important to us. And one of the things that we have to offer in the U.S. is clean water, and we have industry leaders in safe standards, having never dyed products and traceability. And one thing that we have with Atlantic Sea Farms is the Maine brand, and that, like we just heard about, the Alaska brand is also very similar. So that helps carry our seafood products into the market. And another thing to highlight is that our food system in the U.S. is broken. Our farmers that grow and process our foods are some of the people that see, the least advantages for the hard work that they put in, and that's something that's really important to acknowledge, and that we at Atlantic Sea Farms are driven to make sure that our farmers are the ones who see the economic viability and that are profitable with what they do on the water. Another pillar for our company is women in business. Especially in seafoods, we don't see a lot of women in leadership roles. At Atlantic Sea Farms, our CEO, Brianna Warner, who you can see in this picture, is a woman running a seafood company. That's extremely rare. We also are a board-driven company that is majority women-held. Our senior staff is 50% women, myself included, and this year I added another woman farmer to our network who joined with her husband, is a farmer. I gotta mention that she has a 100-ton captain's license, which is larger than her husband's license. So there is a lot of strength and resiliency here, and as Dana mentioned earlier today, women in Maine are taking a stand in aquaculture. And then the last pillar is consumer health. And so this is something that we are increasingly hyper-focused on, and having seaweed as a superfood, that is high in magnesium, calcium, and potassium, and that's traceable and clean, is extremely valuable. We're constantly innovating to develop award-winning products that make seaweed easy to incorporate into consumers' diets, and are highly focused on getting seaweed as a center of a plate item and not always just a small ingredient. So this year, or actually in 2022, we launched our sea veggie burgers in 2 varieties, and they are 40% kelp. And so that is something that we're very proud of. And we are involved in 3 different main markets: grocery and retail, food service, and ingredient sales. And the only reason that we ultimately ended up into retail and grocery is because of the pandemic. So with great challenges and obstacles, sometimes lead to great results. Here's kind of an outline of our work at Atlantic Sea Farms. We are a vertically integrated company. So what that means is that we partner directly with commercial fishermen, and those fishermen own and operate their own businesses. We have a nursery that Thu runs and manages with a team and supplies seed to our farmers for free. That reduces risk and initial cost, which on the East Coast is roughly a $10,000 investment, which I'm learning is really similar to what you spend for your leases. And that recruit is really not a proper word anymore because we have so much interest after this year with having a horrific, probably one of the worst on record lobster fishing seasons, that now I have an extreme wait list of people that want to work with us. So it is a vetting process at this point, which 5 years ago, if you had asked that we would be in that scenario, I would not have expected that. So that is due for us as well. But we work directly with farmers. Like this is Scott up here, you can see. And we train and educate and work on leasing and permitting, and that's really my role in the company. So I work directly with all of our farmers. We produce the seed, and then we provide free technical assistance and education, and that's on the water training with farmers. So for every first seed out, every first harvest, I'm there with people side by side working together. Along with that, these are really the areas that I want to focus on and that we've been touching on at this point in the day, but processing and creating and distributing products. And I'm at my time, so, oh, okay. Oh, that's more than I thought. Great. So this processing and creating, we have critical infrastructure that we need to get kelp out of the water into process and storage within 48 hours. And that's a self-implemented timeline that we use for food safety and quality assurance purposes. But, obstacles that we face, which are different than in Alaska, but trucking and cold storage is extremely limited on the East Coast. That's something that we have many obstacles in, as well as finding load-rated hoists and access to commercial waterfronts. Although we have roughly 5,000 miles of coastline, there's maybe only 20 active miles that are still commercial waterfront. We're extremely facing changes in gentrification along our coastline, and those are things that are limiting our access to the areas that our fishermen need in order to successfully get kelp out of the water and into the production areas and to the market. One thing that we do have a plethora of are boats and capable, skilled workforce, just like you. And so we see a lot of advantages in that area. And working directly with fishermen, they have on-the-water knowledge, they have the gear, they have the social license to operate on the water, and then also the capital. They have the capital to invest in a business that they will then profit from. And they're normally accustomed to spending money in order to make money. So that's not a new idea that needs to happen there. But one of the things that we have invested a lot of our time in that we don't see anywhere else is an SQF certified facility. And that's a safe quality food certification. That's a third-party audit that we have gone and done ourselves in order to protect consumers and machinery in our processing facility. And all of these things are happening under one roof in our one facility. So all of our staff is in one building. We have our nursery, our farmers come and pick up their seed, our production area, our packaging area, and then a distribution, like a hub where trucking comes to then distribute our products to the market. So we're not multiple buildings in multiple places. We're all working together under one roof. In addition to being SQF certified, we also are an organic certified facility. That's in our nursery, on our farms, and in our production space. And this is really what is helping us to create and maintain value-added products by having those certifications. The distribution part is something that has taken a long time to build in an effective way, and we have made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot of things in the process, but the multiple avenues of getting our product to market has really been something that revitalized our sales channels. So having the retail, the food service, and the ingredients creates new markets in all of those areas. One of the things that we are really strict on are the SOPs, pretty much from our seed all the way to our product. And by being vertically integrated, we can trace the seed all the way to the jar on the shelf. And that is for quality assurances purposes, and also to make sure that our consumers are getting the best quality product possible. Our products, you can see right here, are 3 fermented seaweed salad, or 3 fermented products. The center is a seaweed salad, a sea beet kraut, and a sichi, which is a play on a kimchi, along with smoothie cubes, 3 varieties, our 2 sea veggie burgers that we just put out this year, and then we have other products that go directly to chefs and wholesale. And those products, there are 2 stores that you can find them in Alaska, but they are in 1,700 stores nationwide, all the way to Hawaii. And Sunshine Health Foods in Fairbanks, along with Save You More and Soldota, are where you could find them here. But we also have outlets on our website to look for them as well. But those are the 2 areas, process and create and distribute, that have, we could probably talk about all day here, it sounds like, and that I would be happy to talk to anybody more about as I am at my time for today. And please feel free to reach out to me via email or here at the rest of the conference. I'd be happy to talk about any of those channels and the work that we do with our commercial fishing families on the coast of Maine. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Liz and Eric. Do you want to talk about oysters? Okay, everyone welcome Eric Wyatt. There you go. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, I'll try the pink guy. Sorry, when we were setting up the agenda a while back, I noticed there was all these very interesting, kelp product things, and I said, we need to have shellfish in there. I'll make a placeholder. I think she even forgot it was, and here it is. So I'll do my placeholder really quick. And there is possibility for oyster, product innovations. Right now, we don't really look at it. A couple of years ago, when we had a shutdown in sales, right? Loss of demand, that pandemic crap. I had a whole bunch of oysters. I started freaking out and started thinking more about this. But a different product that Wild Fish Cannery is doing, and Barnacle, you're partnered with them. I know they were experimenting with a smoked oyster can product, real high end. That's probably, it's tough to do to make money, but if it's high end and good enough, that's an opportunity. So this idea with the frozen product would utilize some of the existing, we do have freezing capacity in Alaska. And what I did was bought a very expensive Italian shock freezer made by Aeronox from some yogurt shop that was going broke down in Minnesota. And what it really is like a small, intense blast freezer. And I think you've read that. But no shuck prep was one of the things that we got out of this. So I've tested some product and even sent some into Chef Green and Kachemak, and he thought it was amazing. Here's one of the reasons. When we're selling a raw product, there are like these distribution problems. When a restaurant wants to get a certain amount, if you don't have a good wholesaler dishing them out, say a few dozen at a time that you could get, every other day, you're a smaller town, then that's a real problem. If you could pull a dozen out of the freezer and either thaw them or cook them for a customer. That gives all these opportunities. It's easy to store them, opportunities where you wouldn't normally, get in a smaller town. Am I making sense? That smaller amount is available to other restaurants that wouldn't use it. What this is off an Instagram page. Those French guys kind of stole my farm videos. I'm stealing it from somebody in BC who did the same thing that I was doing. I used a 5-pound shrimp box and did this shock freezing. But here are the reasons that I came up with too. That I could harvest when there was not going to be any PST problem, right? And ensure I could have production available. And so I did get permitted by DEC. Carol made it easy and tried this out a little, but the pandemic ended and my customers wanted the product. Whoosh, it went away and I didn't waste time doing it anymore because I figured out one of these days, when I'm closer to town, have a little more facility on the grid, this is one of the things I'll be looking at. There is, I think, like half the market that doesn't want a raw product too. They want a cooked product. And our, at-home testing, we took oysters that were raw, cooked them with the recipe, however, different ways. Oysters that were frozen, straight out of the freezer, cooked them with the recipe. The ones that had been frozen won every time. They were more moist inside. Turned out great. So there's a future that we could use that frozen product to penetrate the American market someday. That's it.
All right, great. And then I'll invite Nate back up to talk a little bit more about Blue Evolution. And then after Nate, we'll have our panel discussion. I'll let you go ahead, Nate. Yeah, thanks.
All right, we'll put the other hat on. When I joined Blue Evolution in January of 2019, I was hired as national sales manager for ingredient sales. So I was given the task of launching our food service and ingredient sales strategy, and along the way have kind of evolved my role within the company. But I'm happy to speak a little bit about what we've learned, what we're up to relative to selling kelp. I think this is the biggest question we often get is where are the markets for this kelp? And there's lots of questions and not a ton of answers in terms of today. We can say definitively. Did this just go out? No. We can say definitively some things that we've learned, and we're still learning as we go. We got our start in 2016, I believe, with CPG products, utilizing the seaweed that I referenced in my previous talk from our plant in Mexico. And for us at that time, this was really a strategy to show the viability of seaweed in consumer products. So these were branded products under Blue Evolution. We had a line of popcorn, 4 different flavors that used low inclusion of seaweed powder. We also had a line of 2 different pastas that had a low inclusion of seaweed in the pasta dough. Fast forward to 2021, or 2022 is when we finally sunset those CPG products to focus on other channels. We're a small team, under 10 of us total, and our bandwidth told us that we had to focus on food service and ingredients. Food service sales for us is targeting independent restaurants, restaurant groups, corporate cafeterias, places like that. And we had a lot of activity from early January of 2019 up until March of 2020, when that door literally slammed shut. We took that as a signal to say we're not going to be the tone-deaf company that's trying to push this specialty ingredient that takes a little bit of effort to educate both eaters and chefs, given that climate at the time. And so we took a step back from food service and have just relaunched that towards the end of 2022. In 2020, when food service kind of was impacted by COVID, we launched a ingredient sales strategy. What that looks like for us is pursuing the largest food manufacturers in the country, understanding how they evaluate our ingredient, to build those alliances with R&D within each of those companies to understand, again, ingredient form, understanding whether they're looking at nutritionals, they're looking at flavor. This has been a very long process for us, 3 years in the making. We hired up a national brokerage representation for Blue Evolution that pushed us into these different conversations and meetings. And we're just now, in 2023, seeing the dividends of all of that work. So I showed this in the last, this is what's coming out of Alaska, all frozen at the moment. And then these last two slides, I thought I'd just share a little bit about how we're positioning our kelp and how we talk about it. This is a slide or a brochure that I love to put in front of chefs, because I want to challenge what they think about seaweed and relate it to something that they know. So we often talk about seaweed as a leafy green, just like spinach, chard, or kale, but it comes with a whole host of other benefits or characteristics that are different than terrestrial leafy greens. So we talk about flavor, umami, and in what ways can a savory note from seaweed enhance a preparation. We also talk about nutritional density. So there's certain sales channels where nutrition is king. We've seen a lot of activity within CPG products specifically. So this is a manufacturer that's looking to solve a problem nutritionally, and seaweed is a really compelling ingredient for them. And then the last piece, so we have this trio of value proposition, which I think we're kind of preaching to the choir here. We're all talking about these things, I believe, but it's flavor, sustainability, and nutrition. And when we talk about sustainability, I love to be able to, look at a chef in the eyes and say, yeah, this plant requires no arable soil, does not require fresh water, no fertilizers, pesticides, and eyes just kind of go wide open. And then you start talking about, but actually this is regenerative in all the ways that we all know. We've invested heavily in recipe development. We've had to take that on as a charge of our own. And I think within these three columns, you're seeing categories where we're starting to coalesce characteristics of buyers. So fine dining, fish, new Asian, so not a traditional Asian restaurant where I think often people see you sell seaweed, you should talk to such and such sushi restaurant. But in those traditional applications, often Alaskan seaweed or kelp isn't evaluated as the same product coming out of Japan. But there are great correlations within seafood, particularly as a partner ingredient with seaweed. Certainly veggie forward, plant-based preparations. This is like the core demographic. These people get it, and they love it for all the reasons it is, but it's a small but loud group, and so we love to play and find ways to show application within those categories. And then brownies, challenging where seaweed can really shine. Tommy Marsh took this recipe, actually, and has developed a line of seaweed CBD brownies. And I think she has some here, and hopefully we all get a chance to try those. So lastly, where we're going, we have a growing team. Some things that are happening on our side is we've relaunched food service. That's hiring up a food service sales team across the country to make those, to set those meetings and to meet with different restaurants and restaurant groups across the country. Just last week, we've hired an executive brand chef for the first time, and in fact, she's actually here tomorrow for the luncheon. Her name is Mylene Chavez. She's owned her own oyster restaurant. She's a massive fan of seaweed, and so for us, this gives us someone on our team who's a peer-to-peer with the people that we want to sell to, and it validates what we're doing and hopefully brings those walls down. I mentioned ingredient sales. We're starting to finally see the fruits of our labor, and it's pointing us towards dry, which we've heard now a number of times. And so we're very eager to produce and get into the market kelp powders and flakes. I know I'm over time. I'll stop right there. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate. You can stick around if you want. All right, excellent. Thank you all so much to everyone who spoke. And if I could have the panelists come back on stage, that would be great. And I'd also like to welcome a very special panelist we're going to invite up as well, Kirk Sparks from Pacific Northwest Organics, working with organic fertilizers, including one that has kelp in it. So please come on up. And if you have some questions, you can start lining up behind the microphone as well. Yellow mic at the front of the room. I know you've got questions. You've been thinking about them all session, so come on up. Don't be shy.
Thanks everybody for coming out and volunteering your time here, and great to see you. So I have one question about seaweed. If they're for seaweed production at all stages of the value chain, what is the single, and anyone or all of you can answer this, what is the single most important thing that Alaska, it's on.
Your mic's on.
Is that better? Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to say, for the Alaska industry and the value chain, what do you think is one or two things that would be the most significant step forward? And I think of this in the context of, we've got this Build Back Better funding. We've got some opportunity to kind of focus on certain areas. There's not enough money there to do everything for everybody, but there are some single steps in each of the regions that would be most significant. But what is the one thing in the seaweed sector you think would advance the industry the fastest? Equipment, technology, whatever it might be.
Well, I'm Kirk Sparks with Pacific Northwest Organics down in Northern California, right along the coast up by Oregon border. And what I'm hearing from this discussion is that you've got to basically kind of open up the market to a number of different ways to market your products. Of course, we at Pacific Northwest Organics use kelp to produce a fertilizer. We've been doing this, actually I've been in this business since, as you can see I'm an old guy, but since 1993, we got into the kelp in about 95, 96, and what we have been able to do over all of these years is help open up the market to agriculture for the use of kelp. When I first started, everybody thought kelp was a snake oil, basically. They didn't have any NPK, nothing. We had to educate a lot of people. We have educated a lot of people. So I think what we're talking about here is education and opening up different markets for consumption of kelp, whether it be food, whether it be animals, animal feed like hogs and cattle and chickens, and I mean there's a whole bunch of arrays, a number of different uses for kelp, and it is so good for all of them. So if we can open up our eyes and our minds and think, how can we do this, and then all come together with a single marketing objective to be able to figure out the transportation of your kelp down into the States, because that's where you're going to sell the most, I mean down in the mainland, whatever. And so if you can get that marketing, come all together, start moving this stuff down in ocean containers. We have actually purchased a couple of ocean containers from Marco down in Kachemak, and so we're open to purchasing additional kelp and whatnot. So at any rate, I better shut up. Here you go. You want to tell them?
I think, Marcos, to your question, I think the elephant in the room is the drying. We've kind of talked around it, but I think if we really drop down into the details, there's some massive challenges there, and concerns of how do we square this equation so that there's profitability, so that you can address that through, maybe equipment and needed infrastructure as stopgaps. We certainly have a cold storage problem in Kodiak, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. It just gives us capacity. We still see this wet to dry ratio right around 20-1, and whether it's conversations about seed selection and genetics, which I understand the complexity of those conversations, but there's things that we have to overcome in order to say, not only do we know that this is an ingredient that the market wants, but we got to be able to make money doing it. And the investments that we're making now are saying, well, we're going to do it and hope we can figure it out, but it doesn't come without a lot of risk.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I don't have much to add other than to say that there's a labor and energy equation there, and we've got to figure out how to dry kelp in a way that's profitable. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, just to add something new to the conversation, I totally agree that kelp drying is going to be a necessary component of Alaska's industry to be able to scale it and move it forward and connect to market. But in addition to that, I'll just throw out cultivation of diverse and unique species like bowl kelp. I think that would accelerate the development of mariculture in Alaska. And from the market read that we have at Barnacle, bowl kelp is a really wonderful species. And then in addition to that, it seems that we're starting to figure out the farming side and the supply side. And so really focusing our efforts on the product development side and the marketing side is what's going to connect that wonderful product of Alaskan kelp into wider markets. And there is a lot we can do collaboratively on the product development side and the marketing side. So I think shifting some resources and continuing to work on that effort is going to be really important.
I want to back you up, Matt, that looking into other species, I feel like the sugar kelp market is really saturated. That's what we're doing in Maine. That's what they're looking at in Europe. I mean, I'm extremely envious of all the native varieties that you have here in Alaska because we don't have that same diversity in Maine. We have a lot of very wonderful species, but you have more, and those are extremely valuable, and that's what will set you apart, and that's what will bring that market value in a different way, and in a way that highlights what is native to Alaska and that wild natural beauty, so that's something that I would definitely agree with. Let's try something different. Let's try something new. That's what this is all about.
I have a little different idea, Maeve. Not surprising. You need a lot of energy to dry kelp. And I think I'm correct in saying, Senator Murkowski's office is interested in small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, non-CO2 emitting, high energy, safe, a lot of power. That's a climate-friendly answer in the future.
I'm just kind of curious, excuse me, this is a question. Are there geothermal locations up here that are providing heat right now, whether it be 300 miles away from the kelp harvesting or 500 miles away? Are there these type of geothermal that could be used? Because down in, in Oregon and a number of other different places, they are using geothermal. Actually, out of Klamath Falls, they're basically growing tomatoes and all sorts of good stuff in greenhouses, heated by the geothermal underneath and bringing it up. And it's pretty neat, actually. So, and the cost, obviously, of the heat is minimal, except for just making sure you have the infrastructure to get it there, and once you've got it, that's done.
That's great, thank you. Marcos, did you have another question? Maybe Julie? Julie's got it, okay.
She outranks me.
Gotcha.
Well, we got to have some variety here, Mark. So I have a question, and Cameron, you should probably be asking this question, but I'm going to ask for you. Okay, so we have a little bit of money in this EDA Build Back Better grant, and if you don't know right now, you can come back to us later with information, but we're curious. We're going to be doing seaweed tissue analysis, so one of the things that we're trying to, we don't have all the money in the world, so we need to narrow down species and what types of things we're testing for the analytes. And so just curious, to further your product development efforts, what are some things that you might be curious about what is in seaweed and what species to look at?
Can I start out by saying thank you for asking that question? One of the things that we're experiencing in Maine is looking into heavy metals in seaweeds. And the testing in that, I think, is something that is extremely valuable to the industry. And it's really expensive to test for. And to test at a rate where you're getting enough of a sample size to understand what you're seeing. And so things like lead, cadmium, arsenic, organic arsenic, things like that. So those are really important, and that's something that I would say if there's a way to put resources towards that, it would be a great use of money.
We use the bull kelp down there in California, and we do the testing. Of course, we're certified organic through basically about 27 states, mostly from the Mississippi to the West Coast. And we do the testing, and basically the amount of heavy metals in our bull kelp that we pull off of the Northern California coast are NA, not applicable. It's basically nothing. There's, we're talking about parts per billion that are so low, and that's pretty neat. And then we do the testing for the micronutrients and for the growth hormones and all that kind of good stuff. So there are so many different attributes about kelp, and one of them that we have found is that it has a real minimum amount of heavy metals. That to me is a big deal. If in fact we're selling products out there in the organics industry, which we are, a little kid picks up this apple and eats it, he doesn't have to worry, well, he doesn't worry, but his parents don't have to worry about heavy metals being ingested by their children. So, at any rate, my 2 cents.
Just to add on to the drying question, I understand that drying in the cold, rainy climate can be very energy intensive. Have any of you guys experimented with like screw presses or auger presses or anything to help remove the water?
What we have found over the years, and we do not do it, but you basically, when you're putting this kelp under pressure, screw or hydraulic, you're basically denaturing a lot of the amino acids. I mean, it's hard to get it just like it, it's not going to stay like it was, basically. We've never tried a screw press. We've only looked at operations that have done the hydraulic press, and basically it's not that successful. It's not that great of a product at that point, just for your info.
Yeah, I'll say we have not experimented with it, but I've researched it quite a bit, and I think what you're pressing out, this I think is exactly what you're saying. I think what you're pressing out, I suspect what you're pressing out is a lot of the nutrients and the good stuff that you want to retain in the kelp. So you could do that and dry and flake it, but I don't think you'd have a very superior product. I'd love someone to test that. I don't think it would be hard to test, but you want to test that.
All right.
Just FYI, we did a little phase 1 experiment about that, running some of Seagrove's kelp through a fish meal plant in Washington, who had, it was a giant facility, so they had a giant screw press, and yes, that's exactly what happened when we pressed it through the screw presses. You get not just water, but you're getting all of the like gooey stuff, right? And we have samples, and we're going to be testing those once we get funding for the next phase. But so yeah, you're changing it quite a bit. So
one of the theories behind this is perhaps the liquid would have independent value as well as the solids, and have them both be potentially products. So you'd have that concentration of nutrients as basically a very basic form of biorefining.
What we do is we start with fresh kelp, whether we harvest it. Most of it for all these years has been off of Crescent City in California, but we did buy a couple of containers from Marco, and it was just excellent quality. But basically we're selling a fresh product, and we're liquefying this, enzymatically digesting it. We basically stabilize it in a numerous different ways, and also we add this humic acid, organic grade humic acid, which stabilizes it. And then what you've got is you have kelp, easy to use, just like we do with our liquid organic fish fertilizer. You could take fish and you could dig it into the roots and whatnot, as the people, the Indians and whatnot on the East Coast. But what we're doing, the only thing we're doing with the fish, as well as the kelp, is we're making it easily available and usable to the farmers. And if you can make things easier for farmers and whatnot, you got something going.
I have a question for Hannah and Asmi. What are the hurdles for the Alaska mariculture industry for Asmi to do those wonderful services for us?
Right. So, as I understand it, there's actually a statute that would prohibit ASME from promoting mariculture products right now. So that statute would have to be changed, and then we could start dreaming.
Do you think there's a lot of competition with foreign markets, like Japan? It's growing a lot. I know a lot of our seafood, a lot of your guys' marketing is overseas to foreign countries.
Yeah, in terms of whether mariculture products would have their best market domestically or internationally, I think you would want to start domestic, but it's important to have more than, to diversify markets, and there are certainly, especially I think in the nutraceutical space, probably the sky's the limit, and you could get some serious premiumization from, Alaska mariculture products, Alaska kelp products. But I think you would be better served to begin in the domestic market, where people know where Alaska is, that it's part of the United States, and that sort of already have that association with the brand.
Asia, South Africa, and Europe have had markets for kelp long before we even started thinking about eating it or using it for fertilizer or whatever, or pharmaceuticals, whatever. So they have an advanced marketing advantage of us in the United States. Just to reiterate, I would say definitely keep it domestic. And then if things start just ripping and whatnot, then, take a look at overseas. But boy, oh boy, the Chinese over there are huge on kelp. Not just the Japanese, but primarily the Chinese. They have huge ships with feeder boats that are working 24 hours, 7 days a week, harvesting kelp.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question here.
Actually, pretty good segue into what I was going to ask, but super basic question, but it does seem like it's the core of a lot of the issues in the industry. But why aren't the economics there in kelp? Why isn't it profitable, and what's it going to take to actually make that a reality?
Time and education.
How much time?
Here, take it away from me.
I mean, I could say just from our business standpoint, we need to farmers need to grow more kelp. We need to have the ability to buy more kelp. The economies of scale will help us drive down our cost in the processing plant. but we're stuck at a point where we don't have a market that's gobbling up that volume of kelp that we need to push through to make this all economically viable for every single stakeholder.
All right, that was a pretty good answer. Okay, so I think we should move to break, but Dana, did you have one?
I did. I don't know if it's a short question.
Oh. What do you think, Missy? One more. All right. That's great.
Thank
okay.
So it's sort of a thorny question, too. So, and maybe the earlier question is a good segue. Seafood's expensive. Meanwhile, people need protein. They need food to eat. And I'm kind of suggesting what would it take to for seafood to become chicken, which I don't think it ever really would in terms of affordability and available protein. But let's think about how to make seafood more inexpensive and therefore more available to people who can afford or who might be strapped for being able to afford seafood. What would that take? And what I think about and what I'm asking you to speculate on is culture techniques, processing, and importantly, scale. And how does that all figure in?
Well, I keep the price down by barely making anything at all. Because I know, oysters, I mean, in the history of the U.S. was every man's type of food. And one day I think, again, it should be. But to be fair, chicken nowadays does not have the same nutrition and value and vitamins and omegas as an oyster does, so you don't need as much. It's the perfect answer for a vegan diet. Have an oyster or two in there.
One of the things I think is making seaweed more of a center of the plate item and not a garnish, not an add-on. It needs to be part of a meal. It's something that people want to eat in larger quantities is one way to get to that point, because I think people think, oh, it's the wrap in my sushi, it's the seaweed salad side I get at the restaurant. It's not the thing that's in the middle of my plate. And that might be one segue to get kelp in a mindset for consumers and to that scalability.
Then the price will go down.
Great. Thank you all so much. Big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
All right, we are at the end of this session. We do have one more session. We are running a little bit over time, but I think that's okay because it's important that we have these discussions and we bring up the thorny topics, because we don't overcome barriers unless we talk about barriers and we strategize how best to do that in support of the industry and growing the industry. So we are going to take a very short break, an 8-minute break. You have time to get a quick cup of coffee. We do have one more session left, and that's going to start promptly at 5.